As you're working with AngularJS and building your applications, there's a few other directives that you might want to know about up front that I'll discuss here. And those are ngCloak, ngSwitch, ngClass, and we've already seen ngShow and hide, but I only showed the hide in the last segment. So what I'm going to do here is explain what these are real quick and show you how to put them to use. So one of the things you'll come across is when you use data binding expressions, you might see a little flicker. And the squiggly brackets will actually show until the data binding kicks in. It doesn't look super professional at all. Now this will be especially true if you put your script at the bottom. Now one way we can fix this regardless though is we can add a directive called ngCloak. Now normally you want to put it at the smallest level possible, so I might put it here and I might put it here, but for this demo I'm just going to put it once. And what this will do is set the display to none of this particular div, so it'll hide it. Now, what'll happen is when Angular first loads, at the very bottom of the script, there's a little code down here. You can see I've already highlighted it. We have ngCloak as an attribute. There's an ngCloak class and some other variations of it, and it sets the display to none and makes it important. Now, if you load up your AngularJS script up in the head, then you should be good to go, and you can just put the cloak because it'll load that style before it'll parse the HTML. I typically like to put my scripts in the bottom nowadays though, and that means this would be too late and I would get the flicker. So the workaround there is take the style, which you can grab this from the docs on the ngCloak directive, and just put it in your style sheet. Now, right when your style sheet loads, you're going to have the ngCloak attribute here that'll be checked, and it'll put it to good use and hide it. Now, just one other tip, if you have some really old browsers you're working with, like IE 6 or 7, you'll have to use the ngCloak class because they don't support the attribute selectors. So be careful there if you have to support some of the older browsers. But going on back, that's all we have to do with the ngCloak, and even though my script's at the bottom, I'll still be covered by adding in the style here. And that is really just a CSS class, if you will, that's being done. If you don't like that, you could just add the class directly. All right, now the next one we're going to talk about is ngSwitch. If I run the page here, you'll see it shows welcome James and login. I only want to show one of those. You'll notice I have an ng init that we already talked about earlier, and I have this logged in false. Well, I'd only like to show that and hide this. Now there's multiple ways we could do this. We could use controllers, which we'll cover later in the course, and other techniques, but an easy one is to use a directive called ngSwitch. And now a switch is literally like a switch in JavaScript and other C-based languages. We can do a check or a test on a particular value and then show or hide things. So in this case, we're going to say switch on, and I want to switch on data because that's my property over here, dot, and then we're going to come over to this one, logged in. So we'll say logged in. All right, that'll tell us what the test is on, but it doesn't handle showing or hiding. The next thing we do though is say switch when. And now I could say when it's true, I'd like to show the welcome message, but when it's false, I could do a when equals false, or I could say default. So when it's not true, I'm going to show a login link. And that's how easy it is to work with that. Now you can even repeat multiple whens if you want to test different scenarios where you have more than just a Boolean. But let's go ahead and refresh, and notice login shows. Let's set login to true. Go on back, and now we have the welcome message. So that's another directive that makes it really easy. Now, I'm not really a big fan of adding logic into views at all, but in this scenario, really it's just DOM logic that you want to hide or show a particular item based on a data value. Makes it easy to work with. Now, alternatively, you could do the ng show or hide up here as well. That'd be kind of up to you and how you want to approach it. Here's an example of ng show. We're going to show this particular div when the data is visible. So right now it is. Let's set this to false, and you'll see this text box kind of disappears. And so it's just the opposite of the ng hide that I showed you earlier. All right, now the next one I want to show is what if we'd like to change the colors based on CSS classes of these divs. And we want to bind those class names to data values. So for this example, I have a status of red right now, and let's go back to the logged in false. We want to make that red, let's say. Well, to bind to that property, we can use the ng class directive. So we could say ng class equals, and then just give it status, data.status actually. And now it should change to red. And there we go. Now on this one up here, we could also say ng class equals data.status. And that's not going to display right now, but let's assume that when they logged in, we'll set this to true. Maybe this goes to a navy class. And you'll notice now it's navy blue. Now those styles, I showed the style sheet a little bit earlier, but we focused on cloak. Those are just defined right here. So anytime you need to dynamically set a CSS class, the ng class directive is pretty handy. So that's an example of a few additional directives that you might run across in the documentation, on blogs, or that you might just need to use in your application.